So I was hanging out with some friends recently, and a few people I didn't know, and one of them asked me this question, well, what's Python good for? And it actually really took me by surprise. I was really shocked to hear this question. Not because I haven't heard it before, not because I haven't answered it before, but because it's been a while. And so let me start by explain that it's been a while by telling you a bit about myself. So yes, I do Django, I do Heroku. Yeah, I got my first developer job in 1998. You can do the math and realize how young I was. I was a test engineer working for a company that had a big Java stack. And we had a foosball table in the break room. And this was a very important foosball table for the test engineers, because every time we wanted to do a new test run, we had to recompile our entire set of code and then run the tests. And that took 15 minutes or so. So what would happen was we'd hack together for a while, and then we'd hit the build and test button and go play some foosball. And then we'd come back and discover that our tests had failed, and we'd try to debug it and figure out what's going on, maybe open a ticket, and then hit the build button and go play some more foosball. I got really good at foosball, but I didn't get very good at programming, because I spent way more time playing foosball than I spent programming. And at one point, it was about a Friday afternoon. I needed to get this done before the weekend, and it was just like it wasn't happening. And anyone who's worked with a static language knows this feeling, where you're spending all of your time waiting for your computer to tell you that you're an idiot, and it's really frustrating. And I didn't know, I wasn't an experienced enough programmer yet to know the difference between static and dynamic languages, to understand the concept of compilation. Really, I was new. I hadn't been working that long, but I knew there had to be a better way. I felt it in my gut that this was not the right thing to do, and I started poking around, and I found this thing called Jython. And Jython lets you use this kind of weird language. It used white space for structure. It was very kind of weird and cute and small. But it let me interactively write code at an interactive prompt that actually tested my application. And it was amazing. And in the course of a weekend, that weekend, Saturday and Sunday, I rewrote our entire test suite in Python. Something that 6 engineers had spent the last 6 or 8 months writing. I was able to rewrite in a weekend in Python. And it was amazing. I'd love to be able to tell you that this is when the company switched to Python, but that's not what happened. My boss was impressed. His boss was impressed. The CTO said, Python? What? No. This is not a language we can base our company on. Stick to Java, young man. In 2001, I was working for a company developing surveillance systems of harbors, airports, marinas, highways, that sort of stuff. It was actually some incredibly cool software. We had the interface. It was a web-based interface. It had a map of the area under surveillance, and rather than moving a joystick or trying to sort of maneuver cameras, you just clicked on the map, and the software would figure out what the closest camera was, what the correct pan, tilt, zoom angle was to get you a shot of that location. Even we actually had geo-referenced 3D models of the area, so we could figure out that this was behind a building, and we had to use that camera. It was really slick. I prototyped this software in Python, just me and a hardware engineer. We got some funding, and this is where I would love to tell you that the software went forward in Python, but of course it didn't. We hired real engineers who rewrote the software in real language, Java. In 2003, I was unemployed and living in New York City, and I really needed a job. And I was quite good at Python at that point. And this is where I would love to tell you that I got a job developing web applications in Python. Of course, I didn't. If you remember Python in 2003, developing web apps at that point in Python was like hitting yourself in the face with a bag of hammers. No, I got a job writing web apps in PHP. Now, in 2004, I went to go work for the Lawrence Journal World, and here's where the story shifts. Web development in Python circa 2004, 2005 was still a bag of hurt, but the difference at the Journal World was management that didn't care. And the web engineers there, Adrian and Simon, were more or less able to do whatever they want, and they wrote this web application stack in Python. And in 2005, we open sourced Django, and it was still at that point a weird choice. There was still a lot of that question, what's Python good for? 2005, 2006, why would I use Django? Who uses it? 2006, 2007, Python really? 2007, 2008. And then at some point, and I can't track down exactly when it happened, this question stopped. People stopped asking this question. It stopped being that surprising. I mean, it's surprising if you use Scala, it's surprising if you use Haskell, it's surprising if you use Go or Rust. But Python, people are like, yeah, whatever. So when I got asked that question, it was so hard to answer the question because the answer to what Python good for is it's good for frickin' everything. It's good for absolutely everything. Games, genetics, marketing, email, newspapers, movies, radios, space. There's not just one space agency that uses Python. There are many space agencies that use Python. Python is right now on a satellite in between us and the moon. It's just amazing. Python's good for everything. The thing about Python, the thing that makes Python really unique is that Python just covers every use case. So Python's not the fastest language out there. It's not even the fastest dynamic language, but it's fast enough. And I see Alex giving me a big grin there, because he would probably like me to mention that with PyPy, this statement that Python isn't the fastest is changing rapidly. But the important point is that Python is fast enough for most purposes. Python is not strictly an object-oriented language, but it's object-oriented enough. If you want to do object-oriented programming, Python says, great, knock yourself out. If instead you'd like to do functional programming, Python says, fantastic, we got that too. Python really is complete. When you look through the language itself, the standard library, and the fantastic collection of add-on libraries, Python has absolutely everything. The thing that's unique about Python is not that it's necessarily the best at any one thing, but that it's the best at everything. So let's say you've got a mathematics simulation. So you could write that in MATLAB. That's probably the leader in that world. And you could do some pretty interesting stuff with MATLAB. And now your boss comes to you and says, that looks fantastic. Let's put it on the web. How do you even go about putting a MATLAB on the web? I have no idea. But if you wrote that using SciPy, now you've got a selection of fantastic web frameworks to put that code up on the web. And this is what I mean by complete. Everything that you need to do in Python is there. And so there's never a problem of, oh man, these two disciplines are coming together, and I've chosen a tool that only fits in one discipline. Python covers it all. You add to that the fact that Python just has this just ridiculous, amazing, wonderful community. There was just an article published. It was an interview with Diana Clark, the aforementioned benevolent Diana for life of PyCon Canada. And the reporter says that what makes Python unique is that in recent years we've become kind of obsessed with outreach, kind of obsessed with spreading Python, with moving Python into everywhere. And this is something that communities should emulate. And this is about reaching out to people not normally represented in tech, but it's also about quite literally spreading Python around the globe. There are PyCons everywhere. There are so many PyCons. So many PyCons. These are just the ones I know about, right? I'm missing a number of regional PyCons like PyOhio and PyTexas and the smaller ones. I haven't taken into account the conferences not keeping the PyCon brand, so things like the SciPy conferences. If it's a day of the year, there's probably a PyCon happening. It's amazing. We won. Good job. All right, 9 minutes, 40 seconds in. Best keynote ever. Yeah. I mean, have we really won, though? is Python really, has it gone as far as it can go? Is this growth curve, are we flattening off now? Or is it continuing? And if it's going to continue, and we want it to continue, where does that future growth come from? You know, when I say we won, well, it's not entirely true, right? I mean, what's the #1 language on the web? Well, it's PHP. About 80% of websites are written in PHP. Do you know what percentage of websites are written in Python? It's about 1/4%. So we've got a ways to go. So I think there are some serious threats facing Python right now. There are a few things that might cause that growth curve to level off, that might cause us to stop where we are. And like all threats, they're double-sided. They represent areas where we have a weakness, but also areas into which we can expand. If you don't have anything, if we had truly won, we'd have no more room for expansion. So when I talk about threats, I also talk about opportunities for expansion. So I see 3 directions threatening Python. We have the threat from within, and that's the threat of fragmentation. We have the threat from above, the enterprise, big businesses. We have the threat from below, new emerging ecosystems and languages. So fragmentation. Right now, there are a lot of different Pythons. When you say, I run Python, you probably mean CPython version 2. But that's a lot more complex than just saying, oh yeah, I run Python. We've got the Python 2 versus Python 3 split, obviously, but there's also this PyPy thing. There's also Jython and IronPython, and a number of other smaller implementations. And these are all mostly compatible. But that mostly is dangerous. I mean, look, Python 3 is scary. There's no denying that it's a better language than Python 2. And there's no denying that we're moving in the right direction. But every transition leaves some proportion of a community behind. And what percentage of our community will we leave behind when we move there? If we're not careful, if we don't spend some serious effort to try to bring these closer together, we risk splitting up from within. The enterprise. Come on, I don't think you can talk about enterprise development at a geek conference without putting up a picture from Star Trek. OK, so look, when I tell people my job title, depending on who I'm talking to, when I tell people who I work for, depending on who I'm talking to, I say one of 2 things. I might say to a room like you, I might tell you that I work for Heroku. If I'm talking to someone in a suit and tie, I might tell them I work for Salesforce. Why is that? Why do I code switch when I talk about who I work for? What's the difference? Why am I a little embarrassed to tell all of you that I work for Uncle Mark? The fact is that we have a ways to go before we can break into a world where we're comfortable with the world of enterprise software development. We don't speak the same language. For many people in our community, these big companies are objects of ridicule. We make fun of them. We laugh about how slow they are, how slowly they adapt to change, how they're all still using stupid old technologies. But the fact is, the enterprise represents the bulk of software development. When we talk about enterprise software, we're talking about most software. And we still haven't made penetrations into that world, mostly because, or at least partially because of our own attitude towards what the enterprise is. When I look at the growth curve for web technologies, which is where I'm obviously the most focused, you can see, especially since about 2008, 2009, you can see explosive growth of Django on the web. And most people sort of assume that that growth comes at the expense of, some people will think that it's at the expense of Ruby, right? They'll say, oh, is there a corresponding drop-off in Ruby on Rails? No, actually, Rails continues to grow at the same rate that it's always grown. And if anything, it's increased over that same period. OK, well, maybe that growth comes at the expense of PHP. Now, PHP development has been, Growth of use of PHP has been roughly linear since about 2000. It's the engine that keeps on moving. So where is all this influx into Python coming in on the web? Well, it's coming from the enterprise. It's coming from enterprise software development. The greatest untapped market for open source is this enterprise software market. There are so many developers writing so much software. And if we don't speak the same language as them, they won't use our technologies. So finally, new ecosystems. So iOS and Android are kind of big threat to Python, because you can't really write a Python app for any of these platforms. You can, sort of, to some degree, but it's not a first-class experience. It's not, you know, Google didn't choose Python for the language in Android. They chose Java. Apple, well, and then, of course, we have the next great language. So I want to tell you a little story about some work that just happened at Heroku. Our languages team just did a bunch of market research trying to sort of determine what languages are the most important for Heroku, both currently and in the future. You know, as you know, Heroku is a polyglot platform. We'll run everything. We'll run whatever language you want to run, but we have limited resources, and so we have to choose what are the languages we're going to focus on the most, what are going to get the best support, what languages are we going to come to conferences and sponsor, what languages are we going to try to hire people out of the community to help us with, where should our focuses be? We can't focus on everything. That's not a focus. So this research identified 2 languages that we believe are, that the company believes as a whole are the most important to our business. The first one's probably obvious. It's Ruby, right? Heroku started as a Ruby-only platform. It's still where the bulk of our users are. It represents, you know, the status quo. What's the second language? Can you guess what the second language was? JavaScript. And specifically Node.js, as a matter of fact. So Node.js has only been out for a few years. It's already our #2 language by deploys per day. Right? If we look at the number of deployments every day, JavaScript is second only to Ruby. And it's gaining fast. The server-side JavaScript community in many ways feels like the Ruby on Rails community, and to some extent the Django community, circa 2006, 2007. There's a ton of energy, a ton of focus, a huge amount of forward momentum. And it's not just us that are driving this momentum. It's those enterprise programmers I talked about. JavaScript is a very comforting language to most developers. I will bet there are as many people here today that know JavaScript as know Python. It's probably true, right? All of you Python developers, you've probably done a little bit of this. And so if someone says, hey, can you write this thing using Node.js? You'll say, yeah, I could probably figure it out. It's not a complicated language. And this is a Python conference. So this means there's a comfort in using JavaScript as a server-side technology. It's a tool we already know. Remember, web frameworks, one of the points of behind the creation of these web frameworks were to sort of democratize web development. It was to make the task of building a complicated website a lot easier. And JavaScript on the server continues this trend, right? It takes a language that was typically not used by back-end developers, only used by front-end developers, and lets those supposed front-end developers write server-side code. And on top of that, it makes a certain kind of concurrent programming really, really easy. So I like to show people a little clip out of the Meteor screencast to talk a little bit about what JavaScript is enabling on the web that hasn't previously been seen, that hasn't previously been possible. Meteor is a new-ish, about a year old maybe, web framework written in JavaScript and subject of a ton of hype, which I'll come back to. But it is really interesting. So let's.
This app is just a list of my favorite colors. It says no colors yet, so let's add some. I go into the console, and since we're using Mongo, I'm just going to type some Mongo commands. Insert red. And as I type the command, the screen updates. Let's see that again. Insert blue, insert green.
Two things to note here. First, the DOM is updating immediately, all by itself. I change the data, and the template updates. There's no callbacks, no bindings, and no controllers. It just works. Second, somehow, I'm using the Mongo API on the client. You've never seen this before. Up until this point in history, database APIs only worked on the server. But in Meteor, there isn't a server API and a client API. There's just the Meteor platform API, and it works everywhere.
Let's be clear. All of this is being saved to the server. Take a look. I open another browser, and it's all here. You don't have to define a bunch of endpoints on the server and make the client call them. Meteor wires it all up for you.
And when we say that Meteor wires it all up for you, that goes in both directions. Not only are these changes being saved back to the server, the client is also listening for changes coming back down from the server. So when I make a change in one window, it automatically appears in all other windows without any other code. Think about it.
Now, he says you've never seen this before, and that's not strictly true. You have seen this sort of real-time application before. You've used Google Docs. But can you imagine writing that? And if you're an experienced web developer, you can probably start thinking about how you might emulate that with the tools you have. You know, I would think, OK, well, I'll need probably socket I/O, so I'll need a separate socket I/O daemon, and I'll need a message bus to pass between my web app and my database, and I'll need to expose an API. And I mean, I can start thinking about this. I could probably emulate this example using the tools that I know. It might take me half a day or so. This is like 5 lines of JavaScript to do this example. What you haven't seen before is something that makes it this easy. And it's the same you haven't seen this before that Web Frameworks showed you in 2005. It isn't that Django does anything particularly novel. Django is a collection of ideas we stole from somewhere else. There's very little actually unique within Django. But what is unique is putting them all in one place and making them easy. And that's, again, what's new here. So let's watch a little bit more.
Now, the whole point of most software is to let people collaborate and exchange information. So let's add a feature like that. How about a like button so people can say what colors they like? It's 5 lines of code, a button, an event handler, and 1 database command. Pretty slick, and of course it's fully synchronized.
So again, start thinking about what you would have to do to implement this example yourself. And I think you'll start to realize that there's something going on here. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that I think that Meteor is the future of the web or anything. People who think about this have some very good criticisms of what Meteor is doing and how it's doing it. But what I do think is clear is what you've just seen, that screencast. That's a screencast from the future. You're looking at what web application development looks like in a window of 3 to 5 years. You're looking at what anyone who's a web developer will be doing. Is that going to be JavaScript? Is that going to be Python? Is that going to be Ruby? It kind of doesn't matter. What you're seeing here is the future of web development, and people will reach for that future wherever they find it. It's really easy to be snarky about JavaScript. There's a lot to dislike. There's a lot to make fun of, especially as Python programmers. It's very easy to look down our noses and say, oh, that's not a real language. Oh, the concurrency thing in Node is really terrible. Pff, Twisted did that 10 years ago. Oh, all those silly nested brackets. These are all the same criticisms Java developers made of Python 10 years ago. They were wrong then, and they're wrong now. There's something very, very serious and very real going on here. And if we, as a Python community, just dismiss it because it's in a language that looks awkward and weird to us, we're going to miss something incredibly important. All right, so enough time. I will switch out of Bummercleese mode and start talking about what we can do about this. Remember, threats are also opportunities. They also represent areas where we have to grow. So where I see fragmentation, I also see the potential for Python to be everywhere. Because the other way of looking at multiple implementations is wherever you are, there's Python. I see the enterprise both as a source of threat, but also as a source of tremendous opportunity. PyCon could be 10 times bigger, and all the organizers go, oh God, no! But it could be 10 times bigger if we had a better draw from enterprise software development. And where I see these new ecosystems, I see a new world forming. I see a primordial soup of good ideas and opportunities. And we in the Python community, we love stealing good ideas from other communities. So let's talk about fragmentation. Python 3, we're getting there. This is from the Python 3 wall of whatever you want to call it. It's the top packages on PyPy from most installed at the top, coming down. So like setup tools is number 1. And then you've got like Django is down there in like the top 10. South is like number 15. Twisted is up there pretty high. This is the most installed packages. And as you can see, most stuff, and those first 2 red ones there are actually paste, which is basically not being really used all that much and may not be ported at all because it's kind of been replaced with other tools. So we're looking at the bulk of the stuff that people use on a day-to-day basis has already been ported to Python 3. It's not until you get down to sort of the hundreds that you reach like a 50-50 area. It'll be neat to kind of present this as like a burn down chart and see how we're doing. So we're actually getting there. Like moving to Python 3 is happening. It's happening steadily, day by day. And the community is moving with us. I talk to people now who are starting new things on Python 3. PyPy just shipped a Python 3 compatible version, not a final release, but a beta. This is incredibly exciting because you no longer have to choose between slow and new, or fast and new, I guess. You can now get fast and new, which is kind of nice. And PyPy is also another incredible source of excitement. PyPy now has support for ARM, which is incredibly exciting. Partially because of this, the Raspberry Pi. Raspberry Pi is a big damn deal. This is a $25 computer that runs Python out of the box. There are 30 kids upstairs. Are they using Raspberry Pis or are they using other machines? We've done these learning labs at a few PyCons where we've taught kids how to program using Raspberry Pis, and they are becoming very popular within schools and within education. And you know what that means, right? It means that this entire generation, their first programming tool is going to be Python. So we can get them long before they even learn what JavaScript is. Yes. But this also means that we see the possibility of PyPy being targeted to other ARM devices. Can you think of other ARM devices that you might want to target Python on? Hint, you have phones. They are ARM devices. This is exciting. We also have technologies like Kivi. Kivi is a cross-platform UI toolkit. And by cross-platform, I mean Mac, Windows, Linux, but also iOS and Android. It's still early days. It's still a little rough. But there are applications in the app stores for those platforms written using Kivi right now. And you can do this right now, and it's no hack. It's no jailbreaking, no cyanogen mod, like proper through the proper channel. So it's possible. It's not happening, but it's possible. We have the possibility, if we can come together, if we can focus on these types of tools that bring things together, if we can work on these sorts of synergistic alliances, PyPy, Python 3, ARM, all of these things coming together, if we can make some progress in these areas, we have the possibility to offer a world where no matter what you've got in your bag or pocket, it runs Python. We're close. We're really close. And like I said, the enterprise represents future growth. It represents the possibility to bring a whole generation of programmers, a whole new world of programmers into our world. We as a community are proving to be better about engaging with business than a lot of other open source communities are. In particular, I've been really heartened by the amazing response of companies to sponsor conferences and meetups, et cetera. And also the willingness of our community to work on projects that have a hybrid volunteer and paid model. OpenStack is a really good example of software that's being developed right now, both by your traditional college students in their underwear in a dorm room, but also people in blue blazers working at Rackspace. Just, for example. We're seeing Kickstarter projects to fund Python development. There was a Django project funded on Kickstarter. There was a Flask book funded on Kickstarter. We're starting to understand as a community, we're trying to learn the lesson that freedom, open source is not incompatible with cash, with money. We're starting to understand that we can work together towards a common goal. And this is the first step in really engaging with a business world, with a world of enterprise software. And we're ahead here from where a lot of other open source communities are. And Python's strong integration story means that we fit very well within these large organizations. Most large companies are a polyglot programming environment by accident. They've been writing software for 20 years, and they have 20 years worth of cruft. And a language that can seamlessly speak to whatever we happen to have, be it Postgres or Oracle or FoxPro. All of those things have Python drivers. That's not true of most languages. The thing we have to realize, the breakthrough that we need to make in order to really move into this world, is that engaging the enterprise doesn't mean that we have to become more like them. It means we have to convince them of the benefits of becoming more like us. And I'm not talking about jeans and t-shirts, but I'm talking about things like agile development, things like engaging with open source, things like using modern tools and technologies, things like experimentation and play and fun. We can convince people by example. We can show them that we've discovered a better way of writing software, and that way is Python. And you know what? It is true that Twisted did concurrency 10 years ago. I said that dismissively a minute ago, but the fact is we've got like a decade of experience that these other new concurrent frameworks just don't. We've got an amazing amount of experience here, and we can probably do it better. And I'm not just talking about old stuff. There's also new stuff on the horizon. Something called Tulip, also PEP 3156 is the proposal here, is a proposal for a new type of asynchronous programming framework. The prototype is called Tulip, and it may end up in the Python standard library. Tulip is incredibly promising. It's incredibly promising for the reason that for the thing that makes Python great, which is that Tulip is not the best concurrent framework, but it's a pretty good one, and it fits seamlessly. Another Django developer, Amrik, put together a sort of proof of concept of what Django plus Tulip plus WebSockets to do asynchronous programming would look like, and it is really awesome. So this is a basic Django view. It takes a request, it returns a response. Very simple one-line function. So here's a WebSocket view in Amarik's proof of concept. A WebSocket view takes a WebSocket and sends data and receives data from that socket. This is a WebSocket echo server. It echoes everything you send to and from. And the really, really amazing thing about this is these can be in the same file, served by the same server, intermixed. So you want to do traditional request-response web development? Great, write it like that. You want to do WebSocket web development? Great, write it like that. Here is Python doing what Python does. We're not the best at anything, but we are the best at everything. We stand the possibility of being able to say, great, you want to do asynchronous programming? Bam, we got that. We can do that too. Oh, and now you want to do asynchronous, a WebSocket-based website that sends data to a bioinformatics simulation? Great, we can do all of that in Python. We're way ahead in our sort of embracing the universe of software development. So the places where we're lacking, we don't have to be the best at everything. We just have to get something there that's good enough that the strength of our community will carry us forward. We can actually do this. We can get Python everywhere. Thank you.
All right, so we actually have time for a few questions for Jacob. If you're on that side of the room, I'll jog over and take your question. If you're on this side of the room, you can come over to the question mic here. Is there anybody who would like to ask Jacob a question?
Where's Russ when you need him?
I know it's early, but there we got one. Of course, it had to be on this side of the room. Now I have to jog. I'll be right there. Oh, it's on.
Yeah. So actually, one of the things I noticed in the Python developing world right now, one of the things I think which is a big challenge, and I think that really should be addressed, is the lack of uniformity and interoperability and niceties in the build tools. And I think actually some of the languages which you say are competitors in the coming ecosystems like Node.js and specifically like Clojure with LineEngine, they provide a much, in my opinion, well standardized and out-of-the-box experience when it comes to build tools and packaging. So yeah, is there, in your opinion, is there any plan to make Python better in that way, which would allow to get people just started head-on and have a better just building experience with packaging?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, one advantage that newly forming communities have is you get to look at what came before. You get to take the parts that were good and leave behind the parts that didn't work. So I'll come back to build tools in a sec, but if you look at WSGI, WSGI was a really big success for Python. WSGI is the protocol that a web server uses to talk to a Python web application. And it replaced a world where deploying Django looked different from deploying TurboGears and looked different from deploying whatever, into one where deploying Python looks like deploying Python. And it was a big success, and it's led to a copying of that mindset, that style. There's Rack for Ruby, there's JSGI for JavaScript. There's been a number of them, and each successive generation gets better. So now when you compare, say, WSGI to Rack, Rack looks a lot better because they had the benefit of looking at us and going, okay, that was good, ooh, yeah, that was a mistake. And so it's the same thing with build tools, right? We have a decade plus of old build tools in the Python community that were, seemed like a good idea at the time, and now are proving to be long in the tooth. You're right to look at JavaScript. Again, Node is doing a really good job around their build and packaging tool chain. It's very uniform, it's very equal, it's very even, but they don't have 2 decades of software that they have to also support. So it's happening. I'm actually more excited about the Python sort of build chain, the Python packaging system than I've been at any other point as a Python developer. The level of momentum has really picked up recently, and there's really a lot of fantastic new work going on. But we do have our wide coverage. The fact that we have Python to do anything you might possibly want is also our curse, because it means if we can't just sort of pick up and say, plop, here's this new thing, hey, millions of people all switch your stuff. We have to think about backwards compatibility and sort of moving things forward responsibly. So it's a different challenge for us. We don't get to move as quickly as we would if we had a brand new ecosystem. So I think we're getting better, but I think you're right to identify that as a place of a pain point currently.
Thank you, Jacob. So I think we have time for one more question if there's anybody else who would like to ask.
Hi. So great talk, but I'm hearing a lot of us versus them. We're better. We need to get them to think like us. I think that the future is a bit more pragmatic, a bit more best tool for the job, and I think it's a prompt more than a question, but the mentality might end up leaving the community behind in the new way of things. Do you have anything to say about that? or thoughts?
It's yeah, it's something I struggle with a lot. I work for a company. I work for Heroku, which is very much a polyglot company. Will run at anything you want to run, but beyond that, Heroku itself, when you deploy an app to Heroku, I think it runs through code written in 6 different languages, if I've counted correctly. Every single time you do a deploy. We use the right, as a company, we use the right tool for the job, and I find that resonates with me. But then on the other hand, I would invite you to watch a talk that Glyph gave at DjangoCon in 2010? In 2009 or 2010, on precisely this question about whether we should be comfortable in a polyglot world or whether we should be pushing for Python. And he makes a number of very, very strong arguments. One of the biggest one being around context switching. We know that when we have to switch from one language to another, there's a friction, there's a period of downtime, there's a pause. And we also know that when we need tools from different languages to work together, we need to find common interchange formats, and there's a lot of friction again when we try to communicate between different languages. So again, there's a friction, there's a loss of productivity, there's a difficulty there. I don't know that I've really answered this question for you or even for myself internally. It's certainly something I struggle with, but I think that there are, I think that there's a way that we can, I think there's a way that we can sort of psychically do both, and that we should be, and we can be, and we should be trying to advance Python and move it forward and to make it do whatever we want. But there's a way to do that which isn't derogatory and isn't looking down at other languages. As I've said a number of times, the thing that Python does really well is steal ideas from other languages, and that's not because we don't like them. That's because we do, right? We shouldn't be looking at JavaScript and going, I can do that. We should be looking and going, oh, it's a great idea. I can do that. It's the same effect, but I think the tone is different, and I think it's important to recognize that we can be frenemies rather than enemies. We can collaborate on the same ideas without necessarily putting them down. I hope that kind of answered your question.
Thank you, Jacob. Let's give him a big round.